Hello, everyone. Good evening. Today we're going to talk about the strange and surprisingly real story of why the ancient Romans used urine to care for their teeth. Let your eyes grow heavy, settle into your pillow, and let this slow, gentle telling carry you towards sleep. Tonight, we drift back nearly 2,000 years to a world without toothpaste, without fluoride, without dental floss, and without any concept of modern oral hygiene at all. We drift back to ancient Rome, a civilization famous for its roads, its aqueducts, its laws, and its baths, but a civilization that also had some surprisingly strange habits when it came to keeping their mouths clean. One of those habits, the one we will spend the next several hours gently exploring, involved something most of us would never think to put anywhere near our mouths: urine. It sounds almost unbelievable at first. Surely this is some exaggerated rumor, some myth passed down and distorted over centuries. But the truth is that ancient sources, written by Roman poets and observers themselves, describe people using urine, sometimes their own, sometimes purchased from elsewhere, as a kind of mouthwash and tooth-whitening agent. To understand why anyone would do this, we need to slow down and think carefully about the chemistry involved, the daily life of ordinary Romans, the materials available to them, and the strange ways that necessity and superstition blended together in the ancient world. Let's begin with the basic problem that every human society throughout history has faced. Teeth get dirty, food gets stuck between them, bacteria grow on them without anything to clean them. The mouth becomes a breeding ground for decay, bad breath, and disease. Today, we take a tube of toothpaste from a drawer, squeeze a small amount onto a brush, and clean our teeth in less than 2 minutes without a second thought. We do not consider how lucky we are to have mint flavoring, fluoride for enamel protection, and synthetic bristles designed by dental engineers. None of that existed for the Romans. They had to improvise with whatever raw materials nature provided. And what nature provided, in this case, was ammonia, a chemical compound found abundantly in stale urine. Ammonia, even though the Romans had no formal understanding of chemistry as we know it today, has real cleaning properties. It is mildly antiseptic. It can help break down certain organic residues, including plaque and some food particles. And when urine sits for a period of time, undergoing a natural fermentation process, the concentration of ammonia within it increases significantly. This stale, fermented urine, sometimes called aged urine in historical writing, was prized not just for personal hygiene, but for an entire range of practical uses throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Imagine, for a moment, a Roman household nearly 2,000 years ago. There is no plumbing system feeding directly from each home into a centralized waste removal network the way we understand it today. Although Rome did have impressive public sewage infrastructure for its time, including the famous Cloaca Maxima, many households kept clay pots or jars specifically for collecting urine. This was not seen as disgusting or shameful in the way it might strike us now. It was simply practical. Urine had value. It could be collected, stored, and later sold or used for various purposes, including in the cleaning of fabrics, in certain stages of leather tanning, and yes, in oral hygiene practices as well. In fact, urine collection became such a normalized part of Roman economic life that the Roman government eventually placed a tax on it. This is one of the most famous, often repeated facts about ancient Rome, and it relates directly to our subject tonight. The Emperor Vespasian, who ruled in the 1st century AD, introduced what came to be known as the vectigal urinae, a tax on the collection of urine from public latrines. Vespasian's son Titus reportedly found this whole practice rather distasteful and questioned his father about it. According to later historical accounts, summarized rather than quoted directly here, Vespasian responded by holding up a coin earned from the urine tax and asking his son whether the coin smelled bad. When Titus admitted it did not, Vespasian made his now famous point: money does not carry the scent of its origin. This anecdote eventually gave rise to the Latin phrase associated with this exchange, a phrase essentially meaning that money has no smell, regardless of how it was earned. Public urinals in Rome were sometimes referred to using a term connected to this emperor's name, a linguistic echo that lasted long after his reign ended. So, why was there a market for urine large enough to be taxed by the state? Because urine, especially when aged, was an essential raw material for multiple industries. The wool industry relied heavily on it. Fullers, the workers responsible for cleaning and treating wool and other textiles, used stale urine as a cleansing agent in their fulling process, helping to remove grease, dirt, and lanolin from raw wool fibers before the fabric could be dyed or finished. The ammonia content acted almost like a primitive detergent. This was such an important part of Roman industry that there were entire workshops called fulonicae dedicated to this purpose, and archaeologists have found the remains of these workshops in cities like Pompeii, complete with large vats where workers would tread on cloth, submerged in urine-based mixtures, much like someone might stomp grapes in a winemaking vat. Given that urine already had this established role in cleaning textiles, it is perhaps less surprising that some Romans extended its use to personal hygiene, including oral care. If it could help clean and whiten wool fibers, removing grime and brightening the material, then by extension, some believed it could help clean and whiten teeth as well. The logic, while unscientific by modern standards, was not entirely without basis. The ammonia really did have some genuine cleaning and whitening properties, even if the overall practice came with significant downsides that we will explore as the night goes on. Now, this practice was not necessarily universal across the entire Roman population. It seems to have been more strongly associated with certain other ancient peoples first. Particularly, some sources point to populations in the Iberian Peninsula, the region that is now Spain and Portugal, who had a reputation among Roman writers for this particular hygiene habit. Roman poets and commentators sometimes mocked or remarked upon the practice of Celtiberian peoples using urine, sometimes specifically imported urine, for dental cleaning. This reputation was significant enough that, according to some ancient accounts, urine was actually imported from the Iberian Peninsula into Rome for this very purpose, treated almost as a specialty product, not unlike how certain goods today are imported because a particular regional version is considered superior or more effective. This detail, strange as it sounds to modern ears, gives us a glimpse into how interconnected the ancient Mediterranean economy truly was. Goods moved across vast distances by ship and by road. Not only luxury items like silk, spices, and wine, but also more mundane and even unusual products tied to everyday practical needs. The idea that someone in Rome might purchase a jar of aged Iberian urine specifically because it was believed to produce whiter teeth than locally sourced urine tells us something about how seriously certain Romans took the appearance of a clean, white smile, and how willing they were to go to surprising lengths and surprising expenses to achieve it. The Roman poet Catullus, writing in the 1st century BC, made reference to this very practice in some of his more biting and satirical verses. Catullus was known for his sharp, sometimes crude wit, often using his poetry to mock specific individuals he disliked, frequently through exaggerated or insulting physical descriptions. In one of his poems, he criticizes a man, suggesting that the brightness of his teeth comes from an unflattering and embarrassing source, namely the practice of using urine for dental cleaning, and Catullus links this specifically to people from the Iberian region. This poem has survived for over 2,000 years, and it remains one of the clearest pieces of literary evidence we have that this practice genuinely existed in the ancient world, at least as widely believed and discussed, even if not universally practiced, by every single Roman citizen. It's worth pausing here and reflecting on how strange it is that a passing insult in a satirical poem, written to mock a personal rival nearly 21 centuries ago, has survived as one of our most important pieces of evidence about ancient dental hygiene. History often works this way. The grand official records, the carefully preserved speeches of senators, the inscriptions on monuments celebrating military victories. These tell us about the public, formal side of ancient life, but sometimes it is the smaller, more personal, even petty pieces of writing, gossip, jokes, insults, throwaway comments that reveal the most about how ordinary people actually lived, what they worried about, what they found embarrassing, and what they considered desirable. And clearly, having white, clean-looking teeth was considered desirable in ancient Rome, just as it is today. This should not surprise us. Across nearly every recorded human civilization, there has been some concept of dental appearance being tied to social status, health, and attractiveness. The methods have changed dramatically. The underlying human desire for a clean, pleasant smile has remained remarkably consistent. As we continue through tonight's slow journey through this peculiar corner of ancient history, we will look more closely at the broader context of Roman hygiene, the materials they had access to for cleaning, the role of doctors and writers like Pliny the Elder in describing these strange remedies, the eventual decline of this particular practice, and how it compares to other ancient and even quasi-modern uses of urine throughout different cultures and historical periods. We'll also slow down to consider daily Roman life, more broadly, the rhythms of work and rest, the public baths, the marketplaces, and how all of this connects back to something as simple and as universally human as wanting clean teeth. For now, let your mind simply rest on this image. A Roman citizen perhaps in a modest apartment in a crowded insula building in the city of Rome, rinsing their mouth with a small amount of aged liquid kept specifically for this purpose, believing sincerely that this practice would leave their teeth brighter and their breath, in their own estimation at least, more pleasant. It was simply part of the texture of daily life, unremarkable to those who did it, yet utterly fascinating to us, looking back across the centuries. Let's continue drifting through this story slowly, breath by breath, detail by detail, as the night goes on. Let's slow down now and spend some time exploring exactly what daily hygiene looked like in ancient Rome more broadly, because the urine-based dental practice we have been discussing did not exist in isolation. It was simply one small piece of a much larger, very physical, very hands-on approach to personal cleanliness that defined much of Roman culture. The Romans, perhaps more than almost any other ancient civilization we know of, placed enormous social and cultural importance on bathing and personal cleanliness. The famous Roman baths, the thermae, were not simply functional places to get clean. They were central social institutions, gathering places where people of different classes might mingle, conduct business, exercise, socialize, and yes, attend to various aspects of personal grooming. A wealthy Roman might spend several hours of their day moving through different rooms of a bathhouse complex: the frigidarium for cold water, the tepidarium for warm water, the caldarium for hot steam, sometimes finishing with a vigorous scraping of the skin using a curved metal tool called a strigil, which was used to remove oil, sweat, and dirt from the body after exercise or bathing. Within this culture that placed such emphasis on visible, physical cleanliness, it makes a certain kind of sense that dental hygiene would also receive attention, even if the methods available were limited and, by modern standards, quite crude. Toothbrushes, as we understand them today, with bristles attached to a handle, simply did not exist yet in the form we recognize. Instead, Romans and other ancient peoples used a variety of substitute tools and techniques. Frayed twigs, sometimes called chew sticks, were used in many ancient cultures, including parts of the Roman world, by chewing on the end of certain types of wood until the fibers separated into something resembling soft bristles, which could then be rubbed gently against the teeth and gums. Tooth cleaning powders also existed, made from a variety of ground substances, including crushed bones, crushed oyster shells, ground pumice stone, and various other abrasive materials, believed to help scrub away surface stains and buildup from the teeth. Some recipes combined these abrasive powders with other ingredients meant to freshen breath, such as crushed herbs, or with substances believed to have additional cleaning power, which sometimes included urine or other animal-derived products. The famous Roman writer and naturalist Pliny the Elder, who lived in the 1st century AD and compiled an enormous encyclopedic work called the Natural History, documented many of these practices, describing various remedies and treatments believed to help with dental problems, oral pain, and the appearance of the teeth. Pliny's work, while filled with what we would now recognize as folklore, superstition, and a fair amount of simply incorrect information mixed in with genuine empirical observation, remains one of our most valuable windows into how ordinary Romans thought about health the body, and hygiene. It's worth noting here that the ancient world did not have a clear, modern separation between what we would call medicine, folk remedy, and superstition. A treatment might be recommended because someone had observed that it seemed to work in some cases, mixed together with reasoning that we would now consider entirely mistaken, perhaps based on the idea that certain substances carried symbolic or even magical properties related to their origin or appearance. Urine, in this context, occupied an interesting middle space. There was a real, observable chemical reason it had some cleaning effect related to its ammonia content, even though the Romans themselves would not have understood it in those precise chemical terms. At the same time, there may have also been symbolic or traditional beliefs layered on top of this practical observation, beliefs about purification, about bodily fluids carrying certain properties that we can only partially reconstruct from the fragmentary evidence that survives. Let's also consider, for a moment, the practical reality of how people in the ancient world would have actually carried out this dental cleaning practice using urine. It likely was not as simple as rinsing one's mouth directly with fresh urine immediately after using it. Ancient sources suggest that the urine used for this purpose, much like the urine used in the wool-fulling industry we discussed earlier, was typically aged or stored for some period of time before use. This aging process allowed bacteria naturally present in the liquid to break down the urea into ammonia through a chemical process we now understand quite well, even though, again, the Romans themselves lacked the precise scientific vocabulary to describe it this way. The resulting aged liquid would have had a notably stronger ammonia smell and a higher pH, making it more effective, in a basic mechanical sense, at breaking down certain organic stains and residues, including the buildup of plaque on teeth. We should also pause to consider the question of smell, because it seems almost impossible to imagine using this substance without confronting an overwhelming, unpleasant odor. And indeed, this discomfort with the smell appears directly in the ancient sources we have, particularly in that mocking poem by Catullus mentioned earlier, where the insult specifically plays on the idea that the supposedly clean, bright teeth of his target actually carry an embarrassing hidden association with this unpleasant practice. The very fact that this could function as an effective insult tells us that at least some segment of Roman society viewed the practice with distaste, even disgust, even while others apparently continued the practice regardless, perhaps because the visible benefit, whiter teeth, outweighed the unpleasant process required to achieve it. This tension between an unpleasant or even disgusting process and a desirable visible outcome is actually a recurring theme throughout the history of human beauty and hygiene practices, stretching far beyond just ancient Rome. Throughout history, in many different cultures, humans have repeatedly chosen to endure uncomfortable, painful, or unpleasant procedures in pursuit of an idealized appearance. Foot binding in parts of historical China, extremely restrictive corsetry in various periods of European history, the use of lead-based cosmetics in ancient Rome, and later in Renaissance Europe, despite eventual awareness of their toxicity. All of these practices share this same underlying pattern: short-term discomfort or harm accepted in exchange for a perceived improvement in appearance or social status. Viewed within this much broader historical pattern, the use of urine for whiter teeth in ancient Rome starts to look less like an isolated, bizarre anecdote and more like one specific example of an extremely common, almost universal human behavior. Let's also take some time tonight to think about who exactly might have practiced this particular form of dental hygiene and why certain segments of Roman society might have been more or less likely to use it. Wealthier Romans had access to a wider range of luxury hygiene products, including scented oils, imported cosmetics, and various other items that poorer Romans simply could not afford. It's quite possible that, for some wealthier individuals, urine-based dental cleaning, especially if using specially imported Iberian urine, as mentioned in connection with the Catullus poem, was actually considered something of a luxury treatment, an extra step taken specifically because it was believed to produce superior results, not unlike how certain modern cosmetic treatments are marketed today as premium, more effective options compared to basic alternatives. For poorer Romans, meanwhile, the practice may have simply been a matter of using whatever was readily and freely available. Urine, unlike many other potential cleaning agents, cost nothing to produce. Every person generates it constantly, simply through the basic biological functioning of their body. In a world where many useful materials, oils, soaps, certain herbs, had to be purchased or traded for, urine stood out as essentially a free resource, requiring only the patience to collect and store it properly. This economic reality likely made the practice accessible across different social classes, even if wealthier Romans supplemented or replaced it with other, more expensive alternatives when they were available. It is also worth mentioning that ancient Roman dental health, in general, faced very different challenges compared to dental health in many parts of the world today. Sugar, as we understand and consume it now in enormous quantities through processed foods and drinks, was extremely rare and expensive in the ancient world, available mostly in the form of honey, which, while still capable of contributing to tooth decay, was nowhere near as omnipresent in the ancient diet as refined sugar is in many modern diets. This meant that some of the dental problems we associate heavily with sugar consumption today, widespread cavities driven by constant sugar exposure throughout the day, may have actually been somewhat less severe for many ancient Romans compared to populations with extremely high modern sugar intake. However, ancient Romans faced their own distinct set of dental challenges, including significant tooth wear from coarse, gritty bread that often contained small fragments of grinding stone mixed in during the milling process, as well as the gradual effects of aging, poor nutrition during difficult periods, and the complete absence of any kind of modern dental treatment for issues like infection, abscesses, or significant decay once it did occur. Archaeological examination of ancient Roman skeletal remains and teeth, conducted by modern researchers using methods unavailable until relatively recently, has actually revealed quite a lot of detail about the dental health of ordinary Roman citizens. Researchers have found evidence of significant tooth wear, evidence of periodontal disease in many individuals, and evidence of dental abscesses that, left untreated by ancient medicine, could have caused significant pain and even contributed to broader systemic infections and illness in some cases. Within this context, anything that a population believed might help maintain healthier, cleaner, whiter teeth, even something as strange to modern sensibilities as aged urine, takes on a slightly different significance. People were genuinely trying to address a real, painful, persistent problem using whatever tools and materials their world made available to them. As we continue moving through tonight's slow exploration of this topic, let's turn next to thinking more specifically about the written sources that survive from antiquity, describing this practice, examining what exactly ancient authors said, how later historians and scholars have interpreted these sources, and how this particular piece of ancient trivia has been passed down, sometimes accurately and sometimes with exaggeration or distortion, into the popular historical knowledge. Many people, let your breathing continue to slow as we drift onward through the quiet details of ancient Roman daily life, the marketplaces, the workshops, the bathhouses, and the small personal rituals practiced by people whose names we will never know, whose only connection to us now exists through scattered fragments of pottery, poetry, and the patient work of archaeologists centuries later. Let's now spend some time looking more closely and carefully at the specific written evidence that survives from antiquity, because it is important, even in a slow, relaxing telling like this one, to understand exactly what we actually know with reasonable confidence, what remains uncertain, and how historians have approached interpreting these old and sometimes ambiguous texts. The most frequently cited piece of evidence, as mentioned earlier, comes from the Roman poet Gaius Valerius Catullus, who lived from roughly 84 to 54 BC. Catullus is remembered today as one of the most skilled and influential lyric poets of the late Roman Republic, known for poetry that ranged from passionate, intimate love poems addressed to a woman he refers to as Lesbia, to extremely sharp, mocking, sometimes outright vulgar verses aimed at specific individuals he found ridiculous, dishonest, or simply personally irritating. In one of these mocking poems, Catullus directs his insults at a man, and within the poem, he makes a pointed remark connecting the brightness of this man's teeth to an embarrassing and unflattering practice associated specifically with people from Celtiberian regions, essentially implying that the man's gleaming smile comes from rinsing his mouth with urine, a detail meant to humiliate rather than compliment. What makes this poem so valuable to historians studying ancient hygiene practices is not necessarily its literary quality. Although Catullus was indeed a highly skilled poet, but rather what it reveals incidentally about everyday Roman knowledge and assumptions. For an insult like this to function effectively, for it to actually land as a successful biting joke among Catullus's intended audience, the underlying practice being referenced needed to be something his readers would immediately recognize and understand. Comedy and satire in any era rely heavily on shared cultural knowledge. A joke referencing an obscure practice nobody had ever heard of simply would not work as an insult. The fact that Catullus could reference this practice in passing without needing to explain or elaborate on what he meant strongly suggests that the association between certain populations and urine-based dental cleaning was widely enough known among educated Roman audiences of his time that it required no further explanation. This tells historians something quite important. By the 1st century BC, the idea of using urine for dental hygiene, even if practiced more by some groups than others, was clearly part of the general cultural knowledge circulating throughout Roman society. People talked about it, joked about it, and apparently associated it strongly enough with certain specific regions, particularly the Iberian Peninsula, that referencing this connection could be used as a sharp, recognizable insult. Beyond Catullus, other ancient sources touch on related themes, even if not always with the same direct specificity. Pliny the Elder, in his sprawling natural history, compiled during the 1st century AD, gathered together an enormous range of information about the natural world, including countless remedies, treatments, and practical uses for various substances derived from plants, animals, and minerals. Pliny's work includes references to the medicinal and practical uses the Romans attributed to urine more broadly, describing various applications believed to be useful for treating skin conditions, certain wounds, and other ailments, reflecting the broader ancient belief that bodily fluids, despite what we might now find unpleasant about them, carried genuine therapeutic or cleansing properties. While Pliny's text does not necessarily focus as precisely and narrowly on dental whitening in the same direct way that the Catullus poem does, it helps establish the much broader cultural context in which urine was viewed quite seriously by many ancient writers as a legitimately useful substance for a wide range of practical and medical purposes, not simply something to be immediately discarded or treated purely as waste. It's worth pausing here to reflect on just how differently ancient societies often viewed bodily waste compared to how most people in modern industrialized societies tend to think about it today. In contemporary life, especially in wealthier nations with extensive modern plumbing and sanitation systems, waste of any kind is typically removed from site as quickly and efficiently as possible, flushed away, treated at distant facilities, and almost entirely disconnected from any further role in daily life. This represents a relatively recent shift in human history, driven by the development of germ theory in the 19th century, improvements in public health understanding, and dramatic advances in sanitation infrastructure. For nearly the entire span of human history, before this relatively recent shift, waste materials of various kinds were viewed through a much more practical, resource-oriented lens. Animal manure, fertilized crops, ash from fires was used in soap making, and yes, urine served multiple practical, industrial, and personal hygiene purposes precisely because ancient peoples lacked our modern alternatives and instead developed practical uses for the materials readily available to them. This shift in perspective, away from simply viewing all bodily waste as universally repulsive and toward seeing it as a resource with this longer, broader historical lens, helps make the ancient Roman urine-based dental practice feel slightly less bizarre and slightly more understandable, even if it remains, by any modern standard, a practice that few people today would willingly adopt. Let's now consider how this small but memorable piece of ancient trivia has traveled through history and reached us today, nearly 2,000 years after Catullus first wrote his mocking poem. For many centuries following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, much of this kind of detailed, everyday cultural knowledge about Roman life faded from common awareness, surviving mainly within the carefully preserved manuscripts maintained by monasteries, scholars, and eventually university libraries throughout the medieval and early modern periods. Catullus's poetry itself nearly vanished entirely for a significant stretch of time during the medieval period. His works survived in only a very small number of manuscript copies, and it was really only through the dedicated efforts of certain scholars during the Renaissance who rediscovered, copied, and began circulating his poetry more widely once again that his work survived into the modern era at all. As classical scholarship developed more rigorously from the Renaissance onward, and especially as the formal academic discipline of classical studies expanded significantly during the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars increasingly translated, analyzed, and annotated surviving Roman texts, including the works of Catullus. It was through this slow, patient academic process, stretching across many centuries, that small but vivid details, like the urine-based dental hygiene reference, eventually became known again to a broader audience. In more recent decades, with the rise of popular history publishing, documentary television, and now, of course, internet content and educational videos, exactly like the one accompanying this narration, such small, vivid, slightly shocking historical details have found a particularly receptive audience. There is something undeniably compelling about learning a strange, almost unbelievable fact about a famous, important civilization like ancient Rome, a detail that completely contrasts with the grand, serious image many people hold of the Roman Empire as a center of military power, architectural achievement, and legal sophistication. Learning that, alongside all of this serious historical importance, ordinary Romans also apparently rinsed their mouths with aged urine to achieve whiter teeth creates a kind of pleasing, humanizing contrast. It reminds us that despite their remarkable achievements in engineering, law, and governance, ancient Romans were still simply human beings, facing the same basic everyday problems we all face: bad breath, stained teeth, the desire to look presentable, and they solved these problems using whatever imperfect, sometimes strange tools and materials their particular historical moment provided to them. This humanizing effect, the gentle reminder that history's great civilizations were built and populated by ordinary, flawed, sometimes strange, and even faintly ridiculous human beings, is part of why these smaller, odder, historical details remain so consistently popular and so widely shared, even centuries after they were first recorded. It connects us emotionally to people who lived unimaginably long ago, people whose names and faces are entirely lost to history, by reminding us that they shared so many of our same basic human concerns and vanities. Let's spend some additional time tonight considering how this particular practice compares to dental hygiene practices found in other ancient civilizations around the world. Because the Romans were certainly not alone in developing creative, sometimes strange solutions to the universal problem of dental care. long before modern dentistry existed. In ancient Egypt, for instance, archaeological evidence and surviving papyrus texts reveal that Egyptians developed their own early forms of toothpaste-like substances, combining ingredients such as crushed rock salt, mint, dried iris flowers, and pepper into an abrasive, somewhat aromatic powder or paste. Believed to help clean teeth and freshen breath, Egyptian medical papyri, including texts dating back over 3,000 years, describe various remedies for dental pain and disease, reflecting a surprisingly sophisticated, if still largely unscientific, by modern standards, approach to oral health within that civilization. In ancient China, historical records describe early chewing sticks made from aromatic twigs, as well as various herbal rinses and treatments believed to help with oral hygiene and dental pain. Some historical Chinese medical texts also describe a kind of early toothbrush with bristles, although these developed more clearly into recognizable bristle toothbrushes considerably later than the simple chew sticks and twig brushes used in earlier centuries. In ancient India, the Ayurvedic medical tradition, with roots extending back well over 2,000 years, developed detailed approaches to oral hygiene, including the use of specific tree twigs, such as neem twigs, chewed at one end to create a brush-like texture, alongside various herbal tooth powders and rinses believed to support both dental and overall health, reflecting Ayurveda's broader holistic approach, connecting oral health to overall bodily well-being. When we place the Roman use of urine alongside these other ancient practices, what becomes clear is a broader, consistent pattern across nearly every ancient civilization we have detailed historical records for. Human beings have always cared about their dental health and appearance, and have always been willing to experiment with whatever natural materials were available to them: herbs, minerals, animal products, and yes, occasionally, substances we would now consider deeply unpleasant. In the Roman urine practice, while certainly one of the more startling examples when first encountered, fits within this much larger, very human historical pattern of resourceful, sometimes strange, experimentation in pursuit of basic, personal hygiene goals. As we continue drifting through tonight's slow exploration, let's turn next toward thinking more deeply about the broader Roman relationship with cleanliness, beauty standards, and the body, examining how concepts of attractiveness and social respectability connected to physical appearance throughout Roman society, and how dental appearance specifically fit within this much wider web of social and cultural expectations. Let's slow down even further now and spend some time exploring the broader Roman cultural relationship with beauty, physical appearance, and social respectability, because understanding this wider context helps us appreciate why something as specific as tooth whiteness mattered enough to Roman society that people would go to such unusual lengths to achieve it. Roman society, much like many ancient and indeed many modern societies, placed significant social value on physical appearance, though the specific standards and ideals shifted considerably depending on time period, social class, and individual circumstances. For wealthy, elite Romans, appearance was deeply tied to broader concepts of social status, dignity, and self-presentation. A well-groomed, healthy, attractive appearance signaled wealth, leisure time, and social standing. Since maintaining such an appearance required both financial resources and the free time necessary for grooming, bathing, and self-care, resources that poorer Romans, occupied with the daily demands of manual labor and survival, often had in much shorter supply. This connection between appearance and social status applied to many different aspects of physical presentation, hairstyles, clothing, skin care, and yes, dental appearance as well. Roman portraiture, surviving in countless busts, statues, and painted images from across the empire, frequently emphasizes idealized features, smooth skin, well-arranged hair, confident expressions, reflecting both genuine aesthetic preferences of the time and the deliberate, often somewhat exaggerated, self-presentation choices made by wealthy individuals commissioning these portraits to project an image of dignity, health, and social importance. Roman literature similarly contains numerous references to beauty standards, cosmetic practices, and grooming habits, many of which strike modern readers as surprisingly similar to contemporary concerns. Roman women, and to a lesser but still notable extent, Roman men used various cosmetics, including powders to lighten the complexion, often made from substances like chalk or, more dangerously, white lead, which we now know to be highly toxic. Despite this danger remaining unrecognized, or at least significantly underappreciated at the time, rouge made from various plant or mineral pigments was used to add color to cheeks and lips. Eyebrows were sometimes darkened using kohl or other pigments. Hair was elaborately styled, sometimes using wigs or hairpieces, particularly among wealthy women following changing fashionable styles, influenced by the imperial court and prominent public figures of the time. Within this broader culture of careful, deliberate self-presentation, dental appearance occupied a meaningful, if perhaps somewhat smaller, place. Having visibly healthy, reasonably white teeth signaled good health and proper self-care, just as having stained, discolored, or visibly decayed teeth might suggest poor health, poor hygiene, or lower social standing. Roman writers occasionally commented on dental appearance in describing both attractive and unattractive individuals, and the broader cultural assumption that white teeth represented a positive, desirable trait appears consistently across surviving sources from this period. This helps contextualize why some Romans might have been willing to use an unpleasant-smelling substance like aged urine specifically for the purpose of dental whitening, if the visible result, brighter, whiter-looking teeth, carried real social value, signaling health, status, and proper self-care to others. Then enduring an unpleasant process to achieve that result might have seemed, to at least some segment of Roman society, like a perfectly reasonable trade-off. This pattern, again, connects directly to that much broader, nearly universal human tendency, observable across countless different cultures and historical periods, to accept significant discomfort, inconvenience, expense, or even genuine health risk in pursuit of a desired physical appearance. Let's also spend some time tonight thinking specifically about Roman attitudes toward the body more generally, because Roman culture held views about physical health, hygiene, and bodily functions that differed in some interesting ways from many people's modern assumptions about ancient attitudes. Modern popular imagination sometimes assumes that ancient peoples were simply unaware of basic hygiene principles, living in filth and ignorance until the relatively recent development of modern science changed everything. This assumption, while understandable given how different ancient hygiene practices were from our own, significantly oversimplifies and somewhat distorts the actual historical reality. Romans, in fact, demonstrated remarkable sophistication in certain areas of public health and sanitation, even without the benefit of modern scientific understanding of bacteria and disease transmission. The extensive Roman aqueduct system, bringing fresh water into cities across the empire, represented enormous engineering achievement, specifically aimed at improving quality of life and public health for urban populations. The Roman sewage system, including the famous Cloaca Maxima in the city of Rome itself, represented a serious, organized effort to manage urban waste at a scale that would not be matched again in many parts of Europe until centuries later. Following the decline of Roman urban infrastructure during the early medieval period, Roman public baths, as mentioned earlier, served not just social functions, but were genuinely connected in the Roman mind to maintaining good health through regular bathing and physical activity. At the same time, Roman understanding of disease, infection, and the body operated according to very different theoretical frameworks compared to modern medical science. Roman medicine drew heavily on earlier Greek medical theory, particularly the concept of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, with health understood as a matter of maintaining proper balance among these four substances within the body. Disease and illness were often explained as resulting from an imbalance among these humors, requiring treatments designed to restore proper balance, sometimes including bloodletting, specific dietary recommendations, or various herbal and mineral remedies believed to counteract particular humoral imbalances. This theoretical framework, while completely incorrect according to our modern scientific understanding of disease and the body, nonetheless represented a serious, systematic attempt by ancient physicians and scholars to understand and address human health using the best available observational evidence and theoretical reasoning of their time. Many specific Roman medical practices, even when based on fundamentally incorrect underlying theory, happen to produce genuinely beneficial results through trial and error, accumulated across generations of practical experience, a pattern we can also observe in the urine-based dental whitening practice. The underlying theoretical justification available to ancient Romans for why this practice worked was likely quite different from our modern chemical explanation involving ammonia content, yet the practical, observable result, somewhat whiter-looking teeth, was real enough that the practice persisted and was considered worth discussing, recommending, and in some cases, worth paying to import specialty urine from foreign regions specifically renowned for producing superior results. Let's also take some time to consider gender dynamics connected to this practice and to Roman beauty standards more broadly, because the specific historical references we have, particularly the Catullus poem, focus on a male target, suggesting that concern over dental appearance was not exclusively or even primarily a female concern within Roman society, contrary to some modern assumptions that beauty-focused grooming practices throughout history were mainly or exclusively associated with women. Roman men, particularly elite men engaged in a public life, politics, oratory, and various forms of social and professional self-presentation, had strong incentives to maintain an attractive, dignified, healthy appearance, since physical presentation connected directly to broader judgments about character, competence, and social standing within Roman public culture. Roman oratory, the art of public speaking, held enormous cultural importance within Roman political and legal life, with skilled public speakers like Cicero achieving tremendous social prestige and political influence, partly through their rhetorical skill displayed in public settings, courts, the Senate, and various public assemblies. Within this culture that placed such heavy emphasis on public speaking and public self-presentation, having an attractive, confident appearance, including a pleasant smile and fresh breath, likely carried genuine practical and social value for ambitious Roman men seeking to build political careers, secure favorable judgments in legal proceedings, or simply maintain social respect and influence among their peers. This helps explain, perhaps, why the Catullus poem specifically targets a man for ridicule using this particular detail. If maintaining good dental appearance carried genuine social value for Roman men engaged in public life, then revealing that a man's seemingly impressive white teeth actually resulted from an embarrassing, somewhat disgusting practice would function as a particularly effective form of social humiliation, undermining not just his physical appearance, but the broader image of dignity and self-control that Roman elite male identity depended upon maintaining in public settings. As we continue our slow journey through tonight's exploration of ancient Roman dental hygiene practices, let's turn next toward considering the eventual decline of this particular practice, examining when and why urine-based dental cleaning eventually fell out of use, and what this tells us about the broader evolution of hygiene practices across the long span of human history, from antiquity through the medieval period, and eventually into the modern era of toothpaste, fluoride, and professional. Let's now drift toward considering how and why this particular ancient practice eventually faded away, replaced gradually over many centuries by different approaches to dental hygiene, as human understanding of chemistry, biology, and medicine slowly advanced across an extremely long historical timeline, stretching from antiquity through to the modern world we live in today. It's important to recognize that historical change of this kind rarely happens suddenly or dramatically. Practices like urine-based dental cleaning did not simply disappear overnight following some single decisive discovery or announcement. Instead, such practices gradually became less common over extended periods of time, as alternative methods and materials became more widely available, as understanding of hygiene and health slowly evolved, and as cultural attitudes shifted gradually across many generations. Following the decline of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, much of Western Europe entered a long period often referred to as the early medieval period, characterized by significant disruption to the large-scale urban infrastructure and trade networks that had supported certain aspects of Roman daily life, including some of the specialized industries connected to urine collection and processing that we discussed earlier, the large fulling workshops requiring substantial quantities of aged urine for textile processing, the organized urban tax collection systems connected to public latrines, and the broader trade networks that allowed for the importation of specialty products like Iberian urine. All of this complex urban economic infrastructure became significantly disrupted as Roman political and economic systems gradually broke down across Western Europe. This does not necessarily mean that urine-based hygiene practices disappeared entirely during the medieval period. In fact, historical evidence suggests that various urine-based remedies and practical uses persisted in different forms throughout medieval Europe, reflecting the continued practical value of this freely available substance, even as the specific cultural and economic context surrounding its use shifted considerably from the earlier Roman period. Medieval medical texts, many drawing on earlier Greek and Roman medical traditions, preserved and transmitted through monastery libraries, and later through the developing university medical schools of the high medieval period, continue to reference various urine-based treatments for different ailments, though dental whitening specifically does not appear to have remained as prominent a documented practice compared to its apparent significance during the late Roman Republic and early Empire. As we move further forward through history into the Renaissance and early modern periods, we begin to see the gradual development of more recognizably modern approaches to dental hygiene. Even though genuine scientific understanding of dental health remained quite limited compared to today's standards, tooth powders made from various abrasive substances, sometimes combined with aromatic herbs or other ingredients believed to freshen breath, became increasingly common across Europe. Early dental professionals, sometimes overlapping significantly with barbers given the historical connection between barbering and various minor medical and surgical procedures in medieval and early modern Europe, began developing more specialized tools and techniques for addressing dental problems, even though formal dentistry as a distinct, scientifically grounded medical specialty would not fully develop until considerably later, really taking shape as a recognized and increasingly rigorous profession during the 18th and 19th centuries. The development of modern toothpaste, as we would recognize it today, represents a relatively recent historical development, emerging gradually from the 19th century onward. Early commercial toothpaste products began appearing during this period, initially often sold in jar or powder form rather than the familiar tube format we use today, which itself only became widely available following further developments in packaging technology toward the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. The addition of fluoride to toothpaste, now considered one of the single most important advances in preventing tooth decay across entire populations, did not become widespread until the mid-20th century, following extensive scientific research demonstrating fluoride's significant protective effect on dental enamel. When we place the ancient Roman urine-based dental practice within this much longer historical timeline, stretching from antiquity through to the development of modern fluoride toothpaste, roughly 2,000 years later, we can appreciate just how recent and historically unusual Our current, highly effective, scientifically developed approach to dental hygiene actually is, for the vast majority of human history, going back not just centuries, but many thousands of years, people addressed the universal, persistent problem of dental health and hygiene using whatever imperfect natural materials and folk remedies were available to them within their particular historical and geographic context, sometimes achieving genuinely useful results. Through accumulated practical experience and trial and error, even without anything resembling our modern scientific understanding of this long historical perspective, offers an interesting opportunity for reflection as we drift toward the later portions of tonight's exploration. It's worth considering, even briefly, how future generations might eventually look back on some of our own current practices that seem perfectly normal and sensible to us today, with the same mixture of curiosity, mild amusement, and historical distance with which we now regard the ancient Roman use of urine for dental whitening. Scientific and medical understanding continues to advance, and it's entirely possible, even likely, that certain practices widely accepted today will eventually be viewed by future generations as similarly outdated, perhaps even slightly strange, once further scientific advancement reveals better, more effective alternatives. Let's spend some additional time tonight reflecting on the broader pattern of how societies develop and eventually abandon various health and hygiene practices. Because this pattern extends well beyond just dental care into nearly every area of human health and medicine throughout history. Bloodletting, for instance, remained a widely practiced medical treatment across many different cultures and historical periods, based on the now thoroughly discredited theory that removing blood could help restore proper balance among the body's humors and thereby cure various illnesses. This practice persisted for an extraordinarily long period of human history, continuing in various forms well into the 19th century in parts of Europe and America, despite what we now understand to be its general medical ineffectiveness and potential danger, particularly for patients already weakened by illness. Similarly, the use of mercury-based treatments for various ailments, including notably for treating syphilis, persisted for centuries despite mercury's serious toxicity, reflecting a pattern where a treatment might continue to be used and recommended for an extended period, sometimes centuries, simply because alternative, more effective treatments had not yet been discovered or developed, even when the existing treatment carried significant risks or limited actual effectiveness. Within this broader historical pattern, the ancient Roman use of urine for dental whitening actually looks relatively mild and harmless compared to some of these other historical health practices, unlike bloodletting or mercury treatment, which carried genuine risks of serious harm or even death. Urine-based dental rinsing, while certainly unpleasant by modern standards, did not pose comparably serious health risks, beyond perhaps some general concerns about hygiene and the potential for introducing harmful bacteria if the urine used was not properly aged or if proper care was not taken in its handling and storage. The ammonia content, while effective for cleaning purposes, also was not present in concentrations likely to cause serious chemical harm to the mouth or teeth when used in the manner historically described. This relatively low harm profile, combined with the genuine, observable whitening and cleaning effect produced by the ammonia content likely explains why this particular practice persisted long enough and was widespread enough to be documented across multiple ancient sources and recognized clearly enough that Catullus could reference it as an effective, immediately understandable insult within his poetry. Practices that produce no observable benefit at all tend to fade away relatively quickly once people notice the lack of results, while practices that produce some genuine, observable positive effect, even if achieved through means that strike us as unpleasant or strange, tend to persist for much longer periods, sometimes for many centuries, even without any clear scientific understanding of exactly why the practice produces its observed benefit. As we continue drifting through tonight's exploration, approaching now the final portions of our slow journey through this strange corner of ancient history, let's turn our attention towards some broader reflections on what this particular historical detail teaches us about studying history more generally, about the value of these smaller, stranger historical facts, and about how learning these kinds of details can deepen our overall appreciation and understanding of ancient civilizations and the long, continuous thread of human experience connecting us back across so many centuries to people who lived such different, yet in some surprising ways, such similar lives to our own. As we settle into this final stretch of tonight's slow journey through ancient Roman history, let's take some time for broader reflection on what we've explored together, drawing together the various threads we've followed across the night, and considering what this particular strange historical detail, the ancient Roman practice of using urine for dental whitening, can teach us more generally about studying history, about ancient civilizations, and about the surprisingly consistent threads of human experience connecting us across nearly 2,000 years of time. One of the most valuable things that small, vivid historical details like this one offer us is a genuine sense of connection to people who lived so long ago that they can otherwise feel almost entirely abstract, more like characters in a story than real human beings who once breathed, worried, laughed, and went about their daily lives much as we do today. When we learn about the grand political events of ancient Rome, the rise and fall of emperors, the conquest of distant territories, the construction of massive public monuments, it becomes easy to think of ancient Romans primarily as historical actors operating on a vast, impersonal stage, important and serious, but somehow distant and difficult to relate to on a personal, human level. But when we learn instead that some Romans rinsed their mouths with aged urine because they believed, with at least some genuine basis in actual chemistry, that it would make their teeth look whiter, we suddenly encounter something far more personal and immediately relatable. We can imagine, quite vividly, an actual person going about an ordinary morning, attending to a small, mundane personal hygiene task, perhaps thinking about how they wanted to appear at an upcoming social event, a business meeting, a court appearance, or simply wanting to feel a bit more confident and put together as they went about their day. This is a deeply human, deeply relatable scenario, even though the specific method used strikes us today as strange, perhaps even somewhat shocking. This connects to a broader truth about studying history that historians and educators have long recognized. The small, personal, sometimes embarrassing, or strange details of everyday life often teach us more about genuine human experience across different historical periods than the grand political and military narratives that tend to dominate more traditional historical education. Knowing the dates of important battles and the names of significant emperors certainly matters and provides essential context, but knowing that ordinary Romans worried about bad breath, wanted whiter teeth, gossiped about each other's grooming habits, and occasionally used genuinely strange substances in pursuit of personal hygiene goals brings the abstract historical record to life in a way that pure political and military history sometimes struggles to achieve on its own. Let's also reflect, as we move toward the conclusion of tonight's exploration, on how this particular historical detail fits within a much larger pattern we can observe throughout the entire history of human civilization. The persistent, universal, deeply human desire for self-improvement, self-presentation, and social approval, expressed through whatever methods and materials happen to be available within a given historical and cultural context. Every civilization we have detailed historical records for, going back thousands of years across nearly every continent, demonstrates some version of this same basic pattern. People care about how they appear to others. People experiment with available materials, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, in pursuit of improved health, cleanliness, and attractiveness. And people develop social customs, sometimes formalized through written texts, and sometimes simply passed down through oral tradition and practical demonstration around these various health and beauty practices. This pattern connects ancient Rome to virtually every other human civilization throughout recorded history, and indeed connects ancient Rome directly to our own modern world as well. Despite the vast differences in available technology, scientific understanding, and material resources separating us from the ancient Romans we've spent tonight learning about, we still care about dental appearance today, perhaps even more intensely in some ways. Given the extraordinary emphasis modern culture places on smiling, photography, and social media presentation, we still spend significant money and effort on cosmetic dental treatments, professional teeth whitening, and various other dental aesthetic procedures, pursuing essentially the same basic goal: a bright, white, healthy-looking smile. That motivated at least some segment of ancient Roman society to use aged urine for dental rinsing nearly 2,000 years ago. Of course, our modern methods are dramatically more effective, vastly safer, and considerably more pleasant to use compared to the ancient Roman approach. Modern toothpaste, professional dental cleaning, fluoride treatments, and cosmetic whitening procedures all rest upon a genuinely sophisticated scientific understanding of dental health, chemistry, and biology that took many centuries of accumulated scientific progress to develop. We should feel genuinely grateful, even as we find the ancient Roman practice amusing and strange, for living in an era with access to such effective, comfortable dental hygiene tools and treatments. Yet, despite this enormous gap in available technology and scientific understanding, the underlying human motivation connecting ancient Roman dental practices to our own modern dental hygiene routines remains remarkably, almost touchingly, consistent across nearly 2,000 years of separation. Let's also take a few final moments tonight to reflect more broadly on the experience of learning unusual historical facts like this one, and why this particular type of historical knowledge, sometimes referred to informally as historical trivia, holds such consistent, widespread appeal across so many different audiences. There is something genuinely pleasurable, almost playful, about discovering a piece of historical information that completely upends our previous assumptions or expectations about a particular historical period or civilization. We tend to associate ancient Rome primarily with grandeur, sophistication, military power, and impressive architectural and engineering achievement. Learning that, alongside all of this genuine grandeur and sophistication, ordinary Romans also engaged in practices that strike us today as deeply strange, even somewhat disgusting, creates a kind of pleasing cognitive surprise, a gentle reminder that history, much like human nature itself, contains far more complexity, contradiction, and simple human messiness than our simplified, popular impressions sometimes suggest. This type of historical learning also tends to stick in our memory more effectively than drier, more abstract historical facts, precisely because of this surprising, slightly shocking quality. Most people, even those without any particular deep interest in ancient history, tend to remember unusual facts like the Roman urine tax or the urine-based dental hygiene practice we've spent tonight exploring in such detail, far more reliably than they remember the names of specific Roman senators or the precise dates of particular military campaigns. This memorability, this tendency for surprising, vivid historical details to lodge themselves firmly in our memory, represents one of the genuine pedagogical values of incorporating this kind of detail into broader historical education and storytelling, alongside the more traditional emphasis on major political events, important historical figures, and broader social and economic trends. As tonight's long, slow exploration draws toward its close, let's take one final moment to simply sit with the central image we've spent so much time exploring together: an ordinary Roman citizen, somewhere in the bustling, crowded streets of ancient Rome, or perhaps in a smaller provincial town, somewhere across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, attending to the small, mundane, deeply human task of trying to keep their teeth clean and white, using the materials and knowledge available to them. This person, whose name and face are lost entirely to history, nonetheless connects to us today through this small, strange, surprisingly well-documented detail of everyday ancient life, reminding us that across nearly 2,000 years of separation, filled with enormous technological, scientific, and cultural change, certain basic human desires, the desire to look presentable, to feel confident, to maintain some control and care over our own physical appearance, have remained remarkably. We've spent tonight moving slowly through Roman bathhouses, marketplaces, poetry, ancient medical texts, and the broader sweep of historical change stretching from antiquity through to our own modern world, all anchored around this one small, strange, memorable detail about ancient Roman dental hygiene practices. As you drift now toward sleep, let your mind rest gently on this image, this quiet, strange, very human moment from 2,000 years in the past. and let the slow, steady rhythm of this long, historical journey carry you peacefully into rest. Thank you for spending this quiet evening with this slow journey through ancient Roman history. Sleep well and rest peacefully, knowing that across the vast span of human history, however strange and different the details may sometimes appear, the basic threads of human experience, our hopes, our small daily concerns, our quiet desire to feel good about ourselves, have always connected us, generation after generation, century after century, all the way back to those ordinary Romans going about their ordinary days so very long ago